Hey guys, it's Wolf Airsoft Gaming, and today I'm going to be reviewing one of the most popular and newest questions in the airsoft community: SMP or Polarstar? Okay, so to start off, to answer this question, I'm going to obviously introduce the systems that you see in front of you. The number one leading airsoft manufacturer in the HPA industry is Polarstar, as everyone knows. It's kind of a branded thing. It's kind of like Kleenex is tissues, even though it's a brand. Polarstar is generally any HPA system. However, that's not the case. The new competitor that was recently released on the market in the summer of 2014 to compete with the Polarstar system is Wolverine Airsoft, and they created a drop-in HPA system. You have it comes with a trigger board, an FCU cord, and the Wolverine SMP itself. Both of them run off compressed air and have different advantages and disadvantages of the two systems. So let's go ahead and start comparing the two. Alright, so there's four categories that both of these different systems differ from. You've got compatibility, adjustments, internals, and social effects. That's right, that's even included in purchasing an HPA system. So the first thing I'm going to go over is compatibility. Which one will best suit the most generic guns out there? Which one's more compatible with different shells, and which one would be overall able to switch from gun to gun and with less problems per se. Okay, so first thing, obviously, if you just bought a body and wanted to do a custom build right from scratch, the Polarstar is going to have the advantage here, since you just drop the gearbox into the body, since it's the exact same shape and there's no problems there. However, with the SMP, you have to have a trigger and a gearbox shell, since you haul that out. So this is more of a replacement system, where this is a drop-in all-in-one system. Another issue about compatibility is the nozzles. SMP Wolverine has recently released 4 pre-production models for the SR25, G36, SCAR H, and the M249. And although they're pre-production, they are available at the moment, and I'm not sure how simple changing the nozzle out, but it looks like you take off the screw there and just switch out the nozzle. I haven't had any reviews or heard about any users that have used them yet, but I'm sure that they would work just as any other one would. Now, the Polarstar, being around for a lot longer, has adapted to a lot more nozzles, along with the different colors, which I won't get into yet. The compatibility nozzles, with some that have priority nozzles, such as the AK-47 for version 3, the SR25, G36, M249, MP5, and the SCAR H. So you've got a wide variety of models that you can adapt the Polarstar to use in that category. Now, along with different nozzles for different gun, Polarstar also has a system with 6 different nozzles: green, gold, blue, black, silver, and red. And those range from 325 to 550 FPS, running 120 PSI. So this one you can get a lot more different variation in FPS, like I said, 320 to 550, whereas the Wolverine SMP does not have adjustable nozzles that changes airflow. So all the nozzles, there's only one of them for each gun, and they run from 350 to 450 FPS. However, you may not be able to get higher FPS. This also does greatly in limiting the abuse of the system, since you can't up the FPS like you could in a Polarstar. So that gives another advantage of less players would be able to abuse the system. Another compatibility issue here. The SMP currently comes in 2 different versions. You've got the version 2, which is shown here, and the version 3. The Polarstar has been around longer, and they've had some more projects come out. So they've got a version 2, version 3, an M240, and an M249 gearbox, or fusion engine, I should say. So you can fit for machine guns, the Polarstar, and more. However, the SMP claims that it would be able to fit into an M249 with their nozzle. So, interesting point there. Okay, so that's the majority of the compatibility issues. The next is adjustments. To start off, the Polarstar has more adjustments. However, the Wolverine SMP system claims that they have more adjustments that adjust by themselves. On the FCU unit, there is no display. They have two adjustable screws in the FC unit that control the FPS of the gun and the rate of fire. So you don't have to, you can't adjust the nozzle dwell and different functions like that you can on the Polarstar. However, Wolverine Airsoft claims that it will self-adjust. So they say that simplicity is the #1 thing in HPA, and they went for simplicity. And however it's supposed to happen, it's supposed to self-tune itself in that aspect of nozzle dwell and things like that. So the FCU on the Polarstar can be adjusted for Poppet Dwell, nozzle dwell, rate of fire, and a few other features, but those are the primary ones. So you can still adjust on both systems how much air is going down the barrel for whatever length of time, and you can also control the ROF, or rate of fire. And the Polarstar goes up to 30 standard. You can customize it for more. However, I just found it interesting, on the specs it says to 30 rate of fire, and on the SMP it says to 40. But of course you can adjust the Polarstar to get higher than that, but just from the spec section of that. Another thing about adjustments are the FPS. However, I already covered that. So you've got more limited on the SMP and more options for you to adjust in the Polarstar. Now, this being said, only being able to go 450 FPS doesn't necessarily mean that if you run 450 FPS, it's going to be your FPS outcome. Well, per se, you put 0.3 BBs in here, and you're obviously not going to be running 425. However, with the ability to shoot 550 with the Polarstar, if you put 0.3s in there, that will drop the FPS to a standard rate. So you can use higher gram BBs in the Polarstar, and SMP is limited to a certain amount, depending on how you want your FPS to be adjusted. So that's about it for adjustments of these. Selector switches, obviously, you can interchange with both, and things like that. The internals of these two are fairly similar in the aspect that they both produce air from the nozzle at the regulated rate set by the FCU. Wolverine Airsoft claims that they have 50% less parts than the Polarstar fusion engine. Now, they don't specifically say that. They say than the leading HPA system, of course, the Polarstar, but they did not directly reference that. So, with that comes the point that SMP, single moving part, obviously less moving parts and less maintenance. However, in the difference of the two, it's not such a big deal. You have a solenoid and a poppet valve located here in the Polarstar, so there's two moving parts, give or take. There's a bit more, there's a spring in there, and you've got your nozzle that retracts. But in the SMP here, you've got one poppet valve, and you can see the airline right here, and the nozzle. But as the name implies, there is only a single moving part. And it's fairly simple. You just plug the wire into the back of that. So there's less actual parts to maintain or lubricate or necessarily worry about in the SMP compared to the Polarstar. However, I would not worry about maintenance or anything breaking. The only stories that I've heard about the Polarstar that were bad were things that, like the poppet started leaking, or there was a leak in the system, which can be pretty easily troubleshooted. Either way, these both are extremely simplistic. However, the SMP definitely has less parts than the Polarstar. That's also attributed to the fact that it does not have a gearbox shell, so you have to drop it in. So they had to make it more simplistic for that. Another problem, I guess you could say, if something does go wrong, which it probably won't, but in the worst case scenario that it does, Polarstar, being established as it is, does have manufacturer direct parts that you can purchase from them, and aftermarket poppet valves and poppet shims. However, the SMP currently does not have any aftermarket parts. I don't even think that you can buy another air nozzle for replacement COM4. However, you can get the 4 upgraded nozzles, as I mentioned previously. But that's as of right now. They're still in somewhat early development. Another fun fact, kind of not too really important, but if you were to upgrade your system, you would have to get a different SLP line for the Wolverine because it has a 1/8 inch macro line compared to the Polarstar that runs a 6mm. So different airflow there, just something to keep in mind for compatibility for users that already have an HPA system. And the last thing that I want to cover, that's not necessarily a huge factor, is the social effects this has brought about in the community. Now, the SMP, being from Wolverine, is the first mainstream competitor to directly compete with Polarstar for being the main HPA system. And when I first heard about it personally, I was like, awesome, somebody finally, to stop this monopoly of, expensive item of Polarstar for $500. And SMP comes in here and they market their first system at $380. Now, that's not a big price drop or anything dramatic that would make people drop their Polarstars and, run to change the system or anything like that. But it's something coming from a manufacturer that doesn't have all the money or resources in the world. They were able to mark it down, and I'm sure if they grew, they'd be able to decrease the price. So, because of its new being in the airsoft community, if you showed up to a game or something like that and you had one installed in your gun, obviously you'd probably spark a few conversations when you told them it wasn't a Polarstar. Since this is relatively new, a lot of people don't know about it yet, and would probably be intrigued by the system and also excited to hear about the price difference. Because it's not just, if you want to have HPA and airsoft from a company, you have to buy Polarstar. Now you have an option, and that's what obviously I was reviewing today. Another social effect is there's a lot of hate on Polarstars because of a lot of people abusing it, and the stereotypical hate is that mommy and daddy got out and bought you a rich gun because they're rich and they just wanted to shut you up, kind of a thing. And a lot of the time that isn't true, and you can't really stereotype an entire a person based on a system. Just because they have something doesn't mean that they're a cheater or that they live with their parents or anything like that. The SMP would not necessarily fall under the same category because of it's better for the fields, and the fact that the field managers can more closely manage the SMP because the FPS only goes for 350 to 450, and the system does have limits. However, for the player, that's not the best thing because you have less options of what you can customize your HPA system to do. So overall for fields, I think they'd be more interested in the SMP because of its restrictions, and the Polarstar still, I know there are tournament locks and such as that, but a lot of fields that don't have close regulations, yes, that is their fault, but people can get seriously injured where it would be less or more avoidable with the SMP. So to briefly summarize and compare the SMP to the Polarstar, I basically listed 4 attributes that best suit both of them. So you can kind of decide for yourself which one would be better for you or that you would be more interested in, and that would just suit your needs. So first we'll take a look at the SMP system over here by Wolverine Airsoft. It's extremely cost effective at $380 for the stock price for either a version 2 or version 3. There's only one moving part, so there's less to lubricate, less to worry about, and that also leads to the next point, which is air efficiency. According to SMP's website, it is double that of Polarstar, because the equations for the SMP to calculate air volume or how many shots you can get is divided by 50, whereas the Polarstar is divided by 100. So you're going to get about, give or take, about double the air efficiency or so, if those those formulas are correct. And the drop in cylinder, of course. Instead, if you wanted to put this in M2409, you wouldn't have to buy Polarstar. You would have to buy a different engine. You just use the same one, just change out the nozzle. If you wanted to put, like the version 2 here, wanted to put in a version 3 gearbox, you can do that. Change out the nozzle, drop it into version 3. So that also gives you more compatibility because of that feature. Now over to the Polarstar. The adjustability on the Polarstar is superior over the SMP because of the multiple functions. However, this also means that you have to adjust more functions, whereas the SMP, you really only have 2 that you can adjust. This can be a positive and negative. Overall, I think that with the correct settings, you would get the more desirable result from the Polarstar. This is a drop-in gearbox, so you don't have to have a previous gearbox. You can also do a ground build much easier. It's also well known. Most people know Polarstar, so it has a reputable position in the airsoft community. And the part availability is also much wider on the Polarstar, as they have different fusion engines that you can buy, as well as stock and upgrade aftermarket parts that you can purchase for the Polarstar. So that's about it, and wraps it up for this episode of Wolf Airsoft Gaming. If you guys, if I didn't answer your question or want to know more about something, drop a comment down below, and I will reply as soon as I can, usually within a day or two. I'll keep on replying to comments as long as you guys send them in. If you enjoyed the video or learned something, make sure to leave a like rating. If you would like to know more about HPA systems, upgrades, anything about airsoft overall, if you would subscribe to my channel, and you'll be updated whenever my new videos come out. And hopefully those will be informative and help you in whatever questions that you have. And again, if I didn't answer any specific, or you have something completely irrelated about HPA and just about airsoft in general, drop a comment down below and I'll answer that as well. So that about wraps it up for this episode of Wolf Airsoft Gaming, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video.